off ominous. Our first killer has no name as he's never been caught. It's the Monster of Florence. The Monster of Florence is nameless and faceless, uncaught, and responsible for 16 graphic deaths between 1974 and 85. MO for target was always consistent, a couple evidently engaged in what writer Douglas Preston called a national pastime in Italy, boinking in parked cars, since traditional Italians do live at home until they're married and Nona doesn't need to hear that. In 1981, crime correspondent Mario Spezzi started reporting on a death. He soon came to believe, like many, that the crime was just one in a series. Spezzi even came up with the name Il Monstro di Florence, or the Monster of Florence, because giving them a nickname is step one, I guess. The only interaction the killer ever made with police was when one of the victims escapes, only after her partner is killed because she reverses the car and slams on the gas, propelling herself backwards into a ditch and catching a motorcyclist's attention, who believes he's witnessing a crash and not a current killing, and stops to help, scaring the monster away before he performs his usual mutilations and finishes his victims. While the female victim does pass from her injuries later, the chief inspector lies to media saying that she regained consciousness before passing and told them some info in an attempt to get the killer to expose himself. On the afternoon following the statement's publication, a Red Cross emergency worker who had accompanied the police to the hospital was called by a man who claimed to be the killer and asked what the victim had said. The same emergency worker is later called again by the killer while on vacation in Rimini. The second call left the investigators baffled how the caller knew how to reach the man. There is so much to cover with this case, including the Sardinian connection theory, the multiple men who went to jail and were released for this crime, and the fact nobody's ever been caught. But I got more to talk about, so let's move on to Maria del Carmen and getting head. Imagine your 61-year-old neighbor comes banging on your door, and when you open it, she's carrying a black and red leather box and asks you if she can store it at your place because it's, quote, full of adult toys. Why? Her husband Jesus has disappeared and the police need to look for clues. Last thing she wanted as an elderly woman was the embarrassment of them opening that box, right? Neighbor's super chill and sweet, says sure, even though it's weird as hell, and proceeds to have the box in her house for a while before it starts to smell because a summer's gone by. Which is the last thing you want from a box of adult toys that aren't yours stored in your house by an old lady. So the neighbor finally decides to look inside, and it's insta regret. Amongst the vibes and the blow-up dolls was the rotting, boiled head of her neighbor's husband wrapped in tinfoil, which apparently sent her into a full-scale panic attack. Baby girl, I do not blame you. Jesus' relatives said they were always skeptical about Maria's claim that her husband went on vacation by himself and then broke his phone by dropping it in the bathtub. They later got text messages from different numbers, but didn't believe they were coming from the missing man. Their efforts to communicate with him verbally were also all unsuccessful. Anyone who's seen Catfish once can see through that. Maria did end up in jail. This may be the scariest on the list because it was the most preventable, failing Esmin Green. What would you do if someone walked into your hospital and collapsed on the waiting room floor? Yeah, I'd help them too. We all like to think that we would, that anyone would, but apparently employees of Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn didn't share this belief. After checking into Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, Esmin Green waited 24 hours for treatment. EMS workers had brought her to the center on the morning of June 18th. The hospital had said she was suffering from agitation and psychosis and was involuntarily admitted after refusing medical review for her diagnosed schizophrenia. At 5:32 a.m., Esmin Green collapsed out of her chair and onto the floor convulsing. In some truly horrible camera footage, you see several patients and even nurses walk by without stopping to see what's happening. She stops moving at 6:07 a.m. Two security guards and a member of hospital medical staff can be seen on video stopping to look at Green briefly before just walking away. Close to 7 a.m., finally a nurse comes over, nudges her with her foot, then again, then checks her pulse. Then the nurse calls for help. The hospital later tries to falsify medical records to make it seem as though she'd been without assistance for just 10 minutes. For security cameras tell a different story, and the hospital fired 6 employees after their investigation. But yeah, before you ask, that lawsuit went absolutely crazy against that hospital. You can't just sleep or eat at anyone's house. My mom was sure to teach me that. People like Carl Tanzler are good reminders, since there was a body in his bed. Carl Tanzer was a radiology technologist at the hospital in Florida. In 1930, he met Elena Milgro de Hoyos, who was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Tanzer became obsessed with Elena and saving her, reportedly showering her with gifts, and told her that he loved her always. However, Elena made it clear she wasn't really interested, and although he wasn't actually a doctor, with her family's approval he tried out different remedies. But she dies anyway in 1931. Tanzer insists on paying for her funeral, complete with a large mausoleum. Her family consented, but they weren't aware that Tanzer alone would have a key to the mausoleum. He visits constantly, leaving gifts, installing a phone so he can talk to her through the wall, normal stuff. 2 years later, Tanzer removes Elena's body from the cemetery. He tries to preserve it by attaching her bones together with wire, placing wax-coated cloth over her skin, and sticking rags in her body to help keep its shape. He was seen purchasing women's clothing and perfumes. A young neighbor saw him dancing with what appeared to be a life-size doll through the window. And then he stopped visiting Elena's grave too. Rumors spread that Tanzer was living with a corpse. And in 1940, those rumors reached Elena's sister, who goes there and confronts him with the whole sleeping with the disinterred body of my sister thing, and he happily shows her. Tanzer was deemed fit to stand trial after a psychiatric evaluation and charged with destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. However, the charges are dropped because the statute of limitations expired. An insult to effing injury, poor Elena's remains, before being laid to rest in an unmarked grave, her modified corpse is put on display at a funeral home where 6,000 people come to see it. Ugh. This guy incites pure rage in me and has from the day I first read this case. It's Xavier Dupont de Ligons, the French F-wit. I can't say it on here, but y'all can say it out loud for yourselves. Has a nice ring to it, especially since this twit is a family annihilator, doing so in the name of money and ego. Xavier is on the run for killing his wife, 4 teens, and 2 dogs at their home L'Oréal Atlantique of Nantes in France before disappearing without a trace in 2011. Xavier worked as a salesman and attempting to create several businesses over the year, all with little success. He owed money. He had been raised affluent, and his wife had too, and they'd spent their lives that way. The entitlement of their regal title inflated them beyond a point of living comfortably within their means, and instead they overextended, aka they were broke. There were so many signs of what was to come too. In July of 2010, Xavier emails friends, writing that there might be accidents that happened to his family that he might be blamed for someday. Even if it's convincing, don't believe it. In January 2011, when his father dies, he inherits a .22 cal, and a month later, having never used one, suddenly obtains a license for it. After another month, he begins taking the firearm to a range. He buys a silencer and as well drives hours to buy adhesives and plastic bags. Month after that, he buys cement, a shovel, and quicklime. And what gets a little confusing is between the nights of April 3rd and 5th, he picks off the family members while still going to dinners and movies with other ones. Seeing as everyone was killed execution style, would Agnes or one of the other teens not have heard something when someone else was taken? Between the panic of Agnes's family, a weird letter everyone receives where Xavier claims to be an undercover cop, and countless visitors banging on their unanswered door, police are reportedly sent back to this property, and finally Xavier's letter tips them off, his comment to ignore the loose backyard gravel. Under it was his family and 2 dogs. Xavier remains missing to this day.
Jane Chapman was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and was given up for adoption by her father to an orphanage. She was taken in as an indentured servant to a local family, and by 1885 she was training to become a nurse. Well, she began harming her patients early on, and after being fired, became a private nurse. She began poisoning her victims in 1895, killing her landlord, her foster sister, several of her patients, and their family members. Toxicology reports were eventually made on some of her victims, and when poison was found, yeah, our girl was suspected. She was arrested in 1901, and by 1902 she'd confessed to killing about 32 people. She went to trial, but was found not guilty for reasons of insanity, and was committed to life at the Taunton State Hospital. Belle Gunness was born in Selbu, Norway, and she moved to the United States by the age of 22. She married her first husband in 1884, and they owned a candy store, but it later burned down. The couple collected life insurance on their business after the fire, and eventually, afterwards, they gave birth to 2 descendants, both of whom died from inflammation of the large intestine, which that can occur from poisoning? Well, Belle collected insurance checks from both of these deaths, and in 1890 she put out a life insurance policy on her husband, and he died that same day, prompting her to move to Indiana and buy a pig farm. By 1892 she married her second husband, and a week later his daughter died in her care. About 8 months after the wedding, Belle's second husband died from a skull injury, and yep, you guessed it, she collected his life insurance. In 1905, she began placing marriage ads in Chicago papers, and when they were answered, a lot of those guys went missing. In 1908, her farm burned down, and upon investigation, I think about 11 bodies were found. Now, initially one of the bodies was suspected to be her, but it was considerably shorter and lighter than she was. Now, it was never officially determined whether or not she had died in the fire or escaped, but she did claim at least 14 victims on her farm. And by the way, most of those bodies were severely mutilated, with the limbs and the heads severed from the torsos. The Kelly family was an American family of serial killers who operated between August and December of 1887 near a town called Oak City, just south of the Kansas state border in no man's land, now the Oklahoma Panhandle. The family consisted of William Kelly, his wife Kate, his son Bill, also called Billy, and daughter Kit. Now, originally from Pennsylvania, the family is believed to have killed at least 11 wealthy travelers. According to the 55-year-old William Kelly's confession, he and his family moved from the Pennsylvania mountains to Kansas in 1869. They moved around to different places along the southern border until eventually settling in no man's land, which is about 25 miles from Beaver. Initially dealing with cattle, the Kellys soon opened a tavern where they housed fellow cattlers and travelers. But in the span of a couple of months, a number of people had disappeared mysteriously along the road leading to the tavern. Now, despite all of this, nobody actually suspected the family of doing anything until about December of 1887, when the occupants suddenly left the house without notifying anybody. A short while afterwards, a traveler from St. Louis named S.T. Gregg, who had visited the tavern before, decided to stop by, check the house. Upon entry, quite a foul stench overtook him, coming from a hidden cellar underneath the house. Now, the bodies of 3 men, already in an advanced state of decomposition, were discovered, as well as a trapdoor under the tavern's floor. Soon after the discoveries, information from Beaver came through that all 4 of the Kelly family had passed through town a couple of days ago, allegedly en route to New Mexico. A posse of about 20 men was quickly organized, and the family's trail led to Palo Duro Creek, from where it appeared that their route had changed towards Wheeler, Texas. After a while, the posse caught up with them and engaged in a 2-hour-long chase. Eventually, Kate Kelly's horse tripped and Kate fell to the ground, breaking her neck in the process, so she was left behind. And about a half an hour later, the vigilantes caught up with Bill and Kit, but William managed to escape. Upon capture, Kit began pleading for mercy, only to be told off by her brother for being as complicit in the killings as he was. Yeah, you guessed it, that was the end of the family. Dr. William Palmer was convicted of killing by poisoning in one of the most famous cases of the 1800s. After completing his medical training, which was constantly affected by nefarious activities, he returned to his hometown to open a medical practice. Shortly after his wedding and the birth of his first descendant, a number of individuals surrounding Dr. Palmer died, often in his presence. That includes his next 4 offspring, his mother-in-law, individuals who he owed money to, his wife, his brother, his uncle, and several of his illegitimate descendants. Now, the death of his brother was investigated, but his involvement couldn't be proven. He only found himself in trouble after the suspicious death of a gambling buddy who fell ill after dining with him. The guy had won a large sum of money, which Palmer collected for him and then used to pay off his own debts. After a post-mortem revealed that Cook had been poisoned, Palmer was arrested, tried, and convicted, largely on circumstantial evidence. He was dubbed Palmer the Poisoner and went the way of the rope necklace in front of a 30,000-member crowd in June of 1856. Now, his trial made headlines because it was the first to be moved away from an outlying jurisdiction because they wanted him to get a fair trial. Adelaide Blanche Bartlett was accused, tried, and acquitted of her husband's death in 1886. Now, while she isn't the only woman in history accused of killing somebody, the way he died, it makes the crime famous. So after encouraging her relationship with another man, Edwin, the husband, was found dead and later discovered to have about a 1/16 of an ounce of chloroform in his stomach. Now, this is unusual because chloroform is a corrosive substance, and swallowing that much would have induced upchucking. There also would have been trace amounts of the substance and burns left behind in his mouth or on his throat, and none of those were found. Even though Adelaide's lover had purchased 4 small bottles of chloroform just prior to the husband's death, her defense claimed that the guy had drunk the chloroform himself and taken his own life. And because there was no evidence to prove how the poison had been administered, Adelaide was acquitted. She made headlines during the trial, but disappeared from society once that was over. One famous doctor at the time is quoted as saying that, hey, in the interest of science, she should say how she did it. Well, if she did do it, she took it to her grave.
Number 10. George Chapman. Starting off with George Chapman, we're going back to the late 1800s for this piece of work right here. He began his career at first as a Polish doctor, but in 1888 he moved to London, and that's when things got a little more dicey. Once in London, Chapman sought out 4 mistresses. Not 3, not 2, not a side thing, not 4. Let's do 4 at the same time. George Chapman was a doctor, a cheater, and a killer. He poisoned all 4 of these women with arsenic. It was terrible. Chapman himself was executed for these crimes in 1903, but we're still talking about them because this guy was so bad, they thought perhaps he might have been Jack the Ripper, but that's since been proven otherwise, so yeah. Imagine someone being so bad, they're like, maybe he was Jack the Ripper, maybe he was just another horrible individual, who knows? Number 9, Arie Cheyenne Johnston. Okay, this was the famous Devil Made Me Do It case. If you've watched the new Conjuring sequel with the same title, this should all ring a familiar bell. Well, it's based of course on a true story, all that's real. Back in 1981 in Brookfield, Connecticut, Arie was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and the victim was his landlord, Alan Bono. Now, prior to this, about 2 months prior, the Glatzel family witnessed their son David host a demon. Right? David was behaving strangely, the family was confident this was the work from the devil, so they called in the pros. They called in Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now this was a process that lasted days, and witnesses say that the demon that fled out of the body of David was the same that took over Arie a few months later. The same demon that made him attack his landlord. Yeah, Arie was convicted and he served 5 years out of a 10 to 20 year sentence. Yeah, he was released on good behavior. Number 8, Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list. He was dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, or the Moon Maniac, or even the Boogeyman himself. It's clear that Albert was a terrible human who did terrible things. I can't really talk about some of the stuff, but yeah, given those nicknames, you can piece it together. In the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing, and then doing other things with these people. Horrible. But the horror was not over at that point. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, the actual number of casualties was closer to 100. And he even claimed that he had some in every state. So that's disgusting. And to make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already terrible enough, this deranged lunatic also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. He sent a letter detailing everything about how he lured the victim and the rest of the horrific details that occurred afterwards. Number 7, Jeffrey Dahmer. Okay, Jeffrey's one of the most well-known serial killers, with his crimes taking place, of course, from 1978 all the way to 1991. His crimes are far too brutal for this channel, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people. At his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney had some interesting words for the court, some interesting things to say. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he was the devil, which was intended to bolster his insanity plea. Odd take, but sure. Again, the devil made me do it type of bullshit. Now, his attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, dare I say caught up in the character from the movie Exorcist 3. Said character being Satan because he was the personification of evil. Not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. I wonder if the devil made him do it. Number 6, Richard Iceman Klinsky. He became one of America's most prolific killers after being hired by the famous 5 families in New York City, okay? He had around a 30-year career as a contract killer, and while he only ended up being charged and convicted for 4 killings, that's still a lot, but he had claimed that the actual number was close to 250, so yeah. When we think of what an assassin would look like, he may not be at the top of this list, which may partially be what helped him be so successful in the first place. While he killed his victims in a multitude of horrible ways, he was dubbed the Iceman due to the fact that he froze all of the bodies. This was to ensure that the coroners would be unable to determine their true time of death, right, and really figure out who was doing it. Richard ended up passing away in jail in 2006. Yeah, we know the time of death for that one. We know that one very well. The Iceman, check it out, it's on Netflix. It's a good documentary. Number 5, Heretics Fork. Yeah, a lot like this. This one sucked. The medieval Heretics Fork was a device used during the Inquisition to punish individuals accused of heresy. You hear the wrong stuff and then you say the wrong stuff, no matter what you do, bad punishment awaits. Some forks going in a place you don't want it to be. This punishment consisted of a long metal fork with 2 prongs that were placed under the chin and the sternum of the accused, making it so you had to stay upright or else, yeah, not good. The device was designed to keep the person awake and prevent them from speaking and or swallowing, and if they do so, it would cause extreme pain. The prongs here could be adjusted to vary the amount of pressure applied, and the device was often left in place for hours or, again, like the other punishment, even days at a time, which is horrible. The Heretics Fork was cruel, and it was a form of psychological punishment that was used to extract confessions and punish those who dared to speak out against the church. Yes, how dare thee? Now hold still. Number 4, Sewer surfing. It's not as cool as you're imagining, but it's something along those lines. Also known as sewer hunting and or draining, sewer surfing was a popular but illegal activity during the Dark Ages and involved navigating through the underground sewage systems of cities, typically for thievery or other illicit activities, trying to find some gold, something, I don't know, something shady going on under the city. Sewer surfing was often punished severely, more than you'd think here. Guys going through garbage, they're like, hang him. It's like, what? It was also considered a violation of the law and a danger to public health. You go down there, you come back up with, I don't know, a plague that you found down there. You don't want that. You don't want a rat to bite you. Offenders would face fines, imprisonment, or even the gallows. However, despite the risks and penalties, many people continued to participate in this dangerous activity as it was their only means of survival or adventure, or money or goods or anything really. It led to numerous arrests and punishments throughout the medieval period. Honestly, fair, I don't know, you never know. Somebody may have lost a nice pocket watch, or maybe you'll find rats and then get really sick. 50-50. I found a pocket watch. Also, the town is violently ill, so I'm rich, sorry. Number 3, blasphemy. Blasphemy! You almost have to yell it every time you say it, you know? Blasphemy was considered a serious crime in medieval times. It involved speaking ill or speaking contemptuously about God, Jesus, and or the church. That's a big no-no back then. Big no-no. This was seen as a direct attack to God and the faith. It was considered a threat to the very fabric of society just because you said some shit. Blasphemers could be punished in various ways. At this point, you probably know them. Imprisonment, flogging, and or, well, yeah, just you're dead now. In some cases, offenders were forced to wear a blasphemer's bridle, which was a metal mask with a spike that was inserted into the offender's mouth, which would of course prevent them from speaking more. Blasphemy laws varied across different regions and periods throughout medieval European history, but they all shared a common goal of protecting the sanity of religious beliefs and shoving metal into a human's mouth. All those things were very important to the faith. Good stuff. Number 2, beard tax. I tried to grow a beard for like 2 weeks and I just immediately bailed on the whole thing. I was like, hey, you'll see me guys, I'll show you. And then I came back, didn't even talk about it. In medieval times, I would have been fine, honestly. It's a weird tax. There were periods and regions in medieval history where facial hair was regulated and or frowned upon. Imagine that, right? Guys trying to grow it out, has a little stubble. Everyone's like, ugh. Really, Alexander the 7th, really? During the reign of Henry VIII in England, a beard tax, cha-ching, was imposed to, well, only men with beards over 2 weeks old. They were required to pay. If you were day 13, they're like, all right, we'll see you tomorrow. You better figure this whole thing out, mister. Vikings, however, what about them? In the Dark Ages, Vikings, they were all about the beards. What happened? Beards, when it came to Vikings, they were highly valued and considered a sign of masculinity and strength. Again, I'd be screwed if it was that time. I'd be good over here, but then I'm a very weak man over here, you know what I mean? No tax and then no muscle. Taylor McWaters, no tax and no muscle. And finally, number 1, not reporting a dead body. Yeah, we've all seen Stand By Me. This can lead to some problems, some troublesome things. This last one here is pretty obvious in theory, but the way that they handled it back then was pretty crazy. We're not doing it the same today. Thank God. Thank the church and the lords. In medieval times, roughly around 1240, the law surrounding the discovery of a dead body, surprise, what's this? Who is this? This varied depending on the region and the time period. But generally, if somebody discovered a, who is this skeleton? What's this? Generally, at that time, they were required to report it to the courts or the lords. The lords, you know the lords, go tell the lords. Failure to do so could result in punishment, as of course, it was considered suspicious behavior. Fair, okay, fair. More often than not, the person who found the body, they would be asked to provide information about the circumstances surrounding the death, including any and all possible suspects. Yeah, so take a guess. He had wood teeth, he looked old and medieval, I don't know, he was someone. In some cases, the finder may have been entitled to a reward for discovering the body, but in other cases, you yourself could be charged with the death. So, 50-50, might get some money, might go to jail. If that was me, I'd be like, nope, I didn't see a thing, sir. I was just looking up at space, wondering what that big rock in the sky is. I don't know what gravity is. All women are witches, right, brother? Cheers. Didn't see anything.
Welcome to another installment of Awful Victorian Era Criminals. We've got another fun mix today, so I hope y'all are ready. ready for more serial killers, family enders, people eaters, and more. We're kicking off today's list with William Burke and William Hare, who were two Irish immigrants who became the most famous body snatchers in history. They began their criminal careers by selling the corpse of a deceased man who lived in their boarding house to Robert Knox of the Edinburgh Medical College, supposedly because the man owed them money. However, the two quickly saw that there was quite a demand for cadavers and that there was easy money to be made in providing them. So they would ultimately kill at least, 17 victims. They started with tenants in their boarding house and then moved on to Woman of the Night and strangers on the streets. Their preferred method of killing was, well, hands around the neck, which became known as burking. Interestingly enough, Burke was the only one who received the rope necklace of death in the end. Hare testified against him and was granted immunity. Burke was also publicly dissected before his skin was used to make a book, which is now housed in the Police Museum on the Royal Mile. These grisly crimes, and others like them, actually resulted in the 1832 Anatomy Act, which changed the laws regarding dissections and the acquiring of bodies in order to combat the lucrative trade in cadavers in the UK. Dr. Neil Cream is another notable Victorian killer and would become known for botched surgeries and liberal use of poison. He got his start in Canada and Chicago, performing life and career-saving surgeries for the world's oldest profession. However, he eventually moved on to killing wealthy members of society. He was a suspect in a number of deaths, but always managed to escape conviction, until his lover turned on him for the death of her husband. He served several years in prison, but was released early, probably because of bribery. He then returned to London, where he had been enrolled in graduate studies years earlier, and eventually settled in Lambeth, and promptly killed 4 Women of the Night with something poison. He was arrested due to his own arrogant and stupid actions, tried and convicted as the Lambeth Poisoner. He was executed shortly after the trial on November 15th of 1892. Now, many ripperologists have attempted to tie Dr. Cream to Jack the Ripper due to his supposed final words saying, "I am Jack." However, the Ripper killings occurred when Cream was in jail in Illinois and he was suffering from advanced syphilis, so his final words can likely be chalked up to his mental instability at the time. Or just delusions. John Liver-Eating Johnston was born in Little York, New Jersey, and served in the Mexican-American War well under the legal age. After striking an officer, he left the army and went west to pursue gold digging. Well, at some point, he developed a vendetta against the Crow tribe, and during his lifetime scalped and killed about 300 people. He got the nickname Liver-Eating because he would cut out and eat the liver of every person he killed. Yeah, what a charmer. Now flash forward, after his passing, years later, in 1972, legendary actor Robert Redford actually portrayed him in the film Jeremiah Johnson, which had a pretty good run. Wild Bill Longley was born in Austin County, Texas, and spent his formative years learning how to use a firearm. And in 1868, he committed his first crime, killing a former slave traveling through town. In 1870, he committed to spend 5 years in the army, but left in 1872. By 1873, he was back in Texas and was accused of killing another freedman. By 1875, he fired at and killed his lifelong best friend and fled town. He committed another killing in 1876, and in that same year became a sharecropper for a preacher, whom, you guessed it, he later killed. He was arrested in 1877 and went the way of the rope necklace in 1878. He was arrested in 1877 and was executed in 1878. Now, flash forward to the future, Steve McQueen portrayed him in an episode of Tales of Wells Fargo. The Bender family, more well known as the Bloody Benders, were a family of serial killers in Labette County, Kansas, in the States that operated between May of 1871 to December of 1872. The family supposedly consisted of John Bender, his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and their daughter Kate. Contemporary newspaper accounts reported that the Benders' neighbors claimed John and Kate were actually husband and wife, possibly via a common law marriage. Estimates reported that the Benders killed at least a dozen travelers, and perhaps as many as 20 before they were discovered. Now, the family's fate remains unknown, with theories ranging from, well, a lot of things to maybe making it out alive. A lot of folklore and legends surround the Benders, making it kind of hard to separate fact from fiction. So what did they do? It's believed that when a guest stayed at their bed and breakfast inn, the host would get the guest a seat of honor at the table that was positioned over a trap door into the cellar. With the victim's back to the curtain, Kate would distract the guest while John, or his son, came out from behind the curtain and struck the guest on the right side of the skull with a hammer. One of the women would, cut the victim's throat to ensure death, and then the body was dropped through the trap door. Once in the cellar, body would be stripped, later buried somewhere on the property, often the orchard, good fertilizer. Although some of the victims were wealthy, others carried little of value, and it's believed the family just killed for the fun of it. So, what happened to them in the end? Well, detectives following wagon tracks discovered the Benders' wagon, abandoned with a starving team of horses, just outside the city limits of Thayer, which was about 12 miles north of the inn. It was confirmed that the family had bought tickets on the railroad. They were headed for Humboldt, but they didn't make it all the way there. At one point, John Jr. and Kate left the train and caught another train south because they were planning on heading to Denison, Texas. But Nobody knows. Never found them ever again.
Since we're talking historical crime, let's throw it back to the 18th century for Nathan Elgen, the servant girl annihilator. Now over 130 years in the past, few official records pertaining to the victims have survived, and the same can be said for Nathan Elgen, the proven yet unproven perpetrator. In July of 1884, there were 2 instances of women, both African American, being stabbed in the face as they slept. They both survived, and authorities investigated as separate incidents. In 1884, an African American woman is then struck in the head with a smoothing iron while she sleeps. She also survives. These nocturnal attacks, not fatal, were idiosyncratic in style that they must have been the beginning of a killer who would later escalate to more gruesome results. And that is the case. In 1884, they escalate again. The first one is simply an assault overnight, but literally the next day, an African American woman named Molly Smith is struck in the head with an axe. Molly Smith set a pattern for all that followed in 1885 as 8 killings took place in Austin, Texas, all carried out pretty much the same way. And the axe would always be left behind, and the bare footprints of the killer, who was missing a toe on one foot, was always on the scene. Meanwhile, Elgen had been getting in trouble since 1881, inciting attacks and carrying weapons, so when the police find him attacking a woman in 1886 Masontown, Austin, they're pretty okay with the fact they had to pop one in him to get him to stop. But the officer's shot didn't kill Elgen instantly. It did leave him paralyzed and mortally wounded, and he died the next day. And a subsequent autopsy revealed that the bullet had gotten lodged in Elgen's spine. Sure, blah blah blah, it doesn't matter. But the doctors also noticed another detail. Elgen was missing a toe on the right foot, and just like that, they'd found their man. Catherine Knight made arrest history in Australia as the first woman to be given life imprisonment, no parole. Why? Well, Catherine wasn't a great girlfriend. She started her long line of violent relationships with another co-worker, David Kellett. Knight met Kellett in 1973, and the pair got married the following year, when she tried to strangle him on their wedding night because he only had intercourse with her 3 times before he fell asleep. Then Knight was in a relationship with David Saunders, and after meeting in 1986. He doesn't marry her, which means he's in for a treat of her insanity. She cuts his dog's throat in front of him. She knocks him unconscious with a frying pan, burns his face with an iron, stabs him in the stomach with a pair of scissors. He finally leaves her and goes into hiding, and then she meets minor John Price in 1994. They're turbulent as hell and really hit a high note in 98 when the pair got in a massive arguments because Price didn't want to get married. Pissed, Knight videotaped a bunch of medical kits he had apparently stolen from work and sent the video to his boss. Price was fired from the job he had for 17 years. And yet somehow the final straw is only when she stabs him in the chest in the year 2000. On February 29th of the same year, he went to the magistrate's court on the way to work and took out a restraining order against her. He told his co-workers afterwards that if he didn't show up to work the following day, it's because she had killed him. Well, that same day, that night, Kathy, after the 2 of them bang one out and John falls asleep, attacks John Price, and after 37 stabs, he dies. She then skins him, hangs it from hooks around the house, and in the kitchen, police later discover baked potatoes and a pumpkin in the oven and a still warm pot with Price's head floating in it with zucchini and cabbage on the stove. Police had intervened, thankfully, before the children had gotten home from school, as Price's boss had called the police when he no-showed at work. In Australian first for women, Knight was sentenced to life in prison without parole at her trial in 2001. She may be known as Cannibal Kathy or Australia's Hannibal Lecter, but Knight has a good reputation in her correctional facility, affectionately nicknamed Nana for her maternal tenderness. It doesn't even feel like it could be real, but it is. Neno Island cannibal hell. In the summer of 1933, thousands of Moscow citizens are rounded up by police and sent to live on a small, swampy island in Siberia, Ob's River. They were unwilling, unknowing settlers in Stalin's new social engineering plan to relocate millions of undesirables into remote areas where they would cultivate the land and develop self-sufficient communities. Like, they would undoubtedly die, but hopefully they'd build some towns first. The first 3,000 arrived by barge on Neno Island in May of 1933. They had no tools, food, or shelter, and conditions deteriorated quickly with snow, frost, and rain. Still, more people kept arriving. Guards patrolled to pop anyone who tried to escape, and they'd distribute rye bread flour every 4 to 5 days, which people would mix with water and then eat, or simply inhale and risk suffocating on. But the most troubling was what the many island's inhabitants resorted to when starvation really set in. A woman from the island was being transferred to another camp and was brought to stay the night at the home of Theophila Berlin, who said in an interview the woman's calves had been cut off. When he inquired what happened, she said, "They did that to me on the island of death. They cut them off and they cooked them." When asked if he ate human meat, one island prisoner told interrogators, "That's not true. I only ate livers and hearts," describing the process of making skewers or picking who to take from, those already close to gone. On the island, there was a guard, they were killing each other. On the island, there's a guard named Kostia Vennikov, a young man, and he fell in love with a girl who had been sent there. He was courting her, protecting her, and one day he had to go away for a while, and he left her with his comrades to take care of her. But with all the people there, the comrades couldn't really do much. People caught the girl, tied her to a poplar tree, and cut off pretty much everything they could. When Kostia came back, she was still alive and he tried to save her, but she'd lost too much blood. August 1933. The island's empty once more. It was evacuated just 13 weeks after the first colonialists arrived. And of the 6,700 prisoners brought there, 4,000 were missing or dead.
Number 10. Trial by jury. The concept of trial by jury can be traced back to ancient Greece and Rome. Don't get me wrong, that's old school. But the first recorded use of a modern jury system, that dates back to the 12th century England. Medieval England, yes, let's get some men in a room and point at witches. Henry II introduced the practice to replace previous methods of trial, which at that point was relying on physical combat or divine intervention, all that kind of like that. Under this new system, a group of 12 men from the community would be chosen to hear evidence and determine the guilt or innocence of said accused. Right? A little better, a little, less witchcraft, more, okay, we're all talking now, we're conversing. This system gradually spread throughout Europe and then beyond, so on and so forth, and it became an important cornerstone of many modern legal systems. Back in the day, this was a noble deed. It was an honor to be part of the jury, Today, not really so much, not the same at all. You're like, what? No, I don't want to do that. It's gonna take so long. It's gonna be like 4 weeks of jury duty. I haven't done it yet. I've just jinxed myself. I'm gonna get called any day now. Don't answer, you know what I mean? Just don't answer your mail, don't look, just avoid it. That's what I do. Number 9, the stocks. All right, relax, stock bros. I'm not talking about those stocks. I'm talking medieval stocks. Those ones are a bit different. Those ones were very bad. Those are all bad. The stocks were a common form of punishment in medieval times. The convicted person's ankles were locked into these wooden boards with holes for their feet and stuff, and their hands were sometimes also restrained. We've seen this before. Usually people are like this. You go to a theme park, you pose with your family in one of these things, you're like, hey, I'm stuck. You're like, get me out, this is scary. They would be left in public spaces like that, such as the marketplace or town square, anywhere public because, why, of course, shame, we gotta shame everyone back then. And if that wasn't bad enough, the accused would then be pelted with food or even physically attacked by the crowd. Imagine that, imagine being so sparse for food and you're like, yeah, let's throw our bread at that guy. It's like, what a waste, we need that. The duration of the punishment, this varied, but it could range from a few hours to several days. Yeah, locked up like this for days at a time. What a joke. It was used for various crimes, theft, drunkenness, and slander, and it was intended to humiliate and shame the offender while also serving as a deterrent to others. Guys like, oh, I'd hate to be that guy over there. Yeah, for sure. All right, let's throw food at him now. Sick. So dumb. So dumb. Number 8, the drunkard's cloak. Yeah, this one's quite funny. Not really, but we'll see. The drunkard's cloak, also known as the barrel or the shaming cloak. Again, shame, big important step back there. This was a humiliating punishment used in medieval times for people who were drunk or disorderly in public. This drunk person, they were forced to wear a large barrel or a cloak made of wood or heavy cloth, something big and obvious with holes cut out for their heads and arms. Like they were a big mascot, a big barrel mascot in medieval times. And sometimes they would have offensive messages or images painted on it. You know what I mean? Like the piece of paper that says kick me. That was like the old school version of that, much worse. The person would then be paraded through town in this garment, this outfit, this big barrel and not fun, often with crowds throwing garbage or food at them. That kind of medieval Game of Thrones stuff. This punishment was intended to publicly shame the person as well. So yeah, shame, and then we'll go into the rough nitty-gritty stuff at the end here. Number 7, eavesdropping. Eavesdropping back in the day. I mean, today we've all done it, right? We've all listened at some point in our lives to somebody we don't know. Every time I hear somebody in our hallway, in our apartment, I have to look, right? I'm like, who is it? Someone breaking in? But if you did it during the dark ages, if you listened in on a conversation you weren't supposed to hear, well, there were some serious consequences that were waiting for you. Eavesdropping was considered a serious crime back then. That's why they're always whispering in Game of Thrones. Now it makes sense, right? The act of secretly listening in on someone's conversation without their knowledge and or consent, while this crime was viewed as a breach of privacy and trust. How dare thee. It was often associated with other crimes such as treason or espionage. This was a big bad. Espionage? Are you kidding? Just because you heard someone say something? Get out of here. Punishments here could include fines, public humiliation, classic, imprisonment, or Yeah, remember what happened to Littlefinger in Game of Thrones? Not great. There's worse stuff that could be done. Yikes, horrible. Number 6, specific hunting. Yeah, you gotta be sure which where you throw an arrow back then. In medieval England, the hunting of the king's deer was considered a very serious crime. Yeah, not that deer. That one's fine, but just don't you hit that one. The act of killing or even injuring a deer was punished harshly under the Royal Forest Law, which was enforced by the king's foresters. That'd be a cool job, just rolling through the forest looking for people. The law applied only to the king's forests, which were areas of land set aside specifically for hunting for his food. Violators could be subjected to a variety of punishments, including fines, imprisonments, and even mutilation. Yeah, a little different than public humiliation. It's just mutilation this time. This law was meant to preserve the deer population for the king's personal use and enjoyment, and served as a way for the monarchy to maintain control over the forest and the resources that it provided. So if you want food, go to that forest over there. It's not even a forest, it's like a marsh. It's horrible. It's like 3 frogs left. Good luck. Number 5, Ted Bundy. One of the most famous killers of all time. Ted Bundy killed upwards of 30 people during his crime spree back in the 1970s. Now, most interviews with Ted are extremely well known and they're horrible, but there's one interview that's very disturbing that's not as popular as the others. In this interview, he's talking about taking the life of a student, Georgianne Hawkins. The chilling part of it is how he talks about these dark matters just so matter-of-factly, like it's a casual conversation between work friends, like it's not him describing the most horrible acts ever committed.
She had a Spanish test the next day and she thought that I had taken her to help tutor me for a Spanish test. It's kind of odd.
Now, of course, over on Netflix, you can pick a number of installments involving Ted Bundy. There's Conversations with a Killer, there's a movie with Zac Efron. Choose your fate. Either way, the story that you're gonna hear is chilling, so you've been warned. Number 4, The Staircase. The Staircase is a classic true crime staple, one of the most widely debated cases ever, as a matter of fact. Back in 2001, Kathleen Peterson was found dead in her home. Now, this docuseries follows the investigation, a few theories surrounding the case and the trial, but Kathleen was found at the bottom of the stairs of her home, and it's horrible, it's sad, it's tragic. And while it was originally regarded as fatal, but an accidental fall that caused her passing, as the investigation unfolds, the truth gets a little more murky. Kathleen's husband, Michael, had always been somewhere near the top of the suspect list onto what happened here, considering that 1, he was the last one to see her alive, and 2, was actually home and supposedly in the backyard when this fall occurred. So yeah, definitely a suspect, for sure. We're gonna ask some questions. There's crazy theories surrounding this death. There's theories of Michael's infidelities all the way to a barn owl. There's a lot of speculation about this case, and this documentary is one you want to watch if you're a true crime lover. You're not really sure what to think afterwards, so comment down below. It's like this is chilling. This is a really chilling case. Number 3, Richard Ramirez. Richard, who is known as the Night Stalker, with of course a documentary under the same name. All these horrible people have documentaries. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of Los Angeles back in the 1980s. He was known for invading homes, which actually initially made him dubbed as the Walk-In Killer. But he had another signature that was concerning to many people, especially during the height of the Satanic Panic. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of his crimes. Imagine walking in on that, that's terrifying. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of the crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat, but instead he was just his own kind of monster. It's said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of swearing to God. And during his court appearances, he would also hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." So yeah, quite horrible, I'd say. Number 2, Charlene Gallego. A match made in hell, it seems. Okay, this is a 2-for-1, so buckle up. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallego, alongside her twisted husband, Gerald, were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped, then they later killed 10 victims. It really was the most twisted situation. Disgusting, awful people. Cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to and receives 16 years. Gerald was waiting for execution, but he actually died of cancer before meeting that demise. So yeah, I guess nature helped out with that one. Charlene, on the other hand, she got out. She actually moved to Fair Oaks, California, and has since changed her name. You can sleep on that. Could be living on your street, who knows. And finally, number 1, don't f with cats. Okay, when I say this is one of the most captivating documentaries I've ever seen, I mean it, okay? I was late to the party for this one. I watched it way long after it was released, but from the moment I started it, I could not stop. This documentary follows the story of the killing of Lynn Jun, which is one of Canada's most infamous crimes ever. I wanted to end on it because, of course, I'm a Canadian. I saw this on the news when I was in school. Lynn was killed by a man named Luca Magnotta, who was already stirring up some internet buzz because he was posting some pretty horrific videos before this crime even happened. As the name hinted towards, he was with cats. That's all I can say. It's horrible. The documentary follows a couple of unbelievable cyber sleuths who saw Luca's messed up videos with the cats and who were intent on finding out who he was and where he was before this killing happened. They knew it was going to get worse, so they tried to track him down, and I'm not going to spoil the rest, but yeah, it's unbelievable. The crimes themselves are absolutely horrible. The story is almost unbelievable also, but the work that they sliver, I already said that, whatever. The documentary really has it all if you're a true crime person. It really is hard to watch because of how tragic it is and the situations are dark, but again, the ending is worth it. It's definitely worth the watch, especially if you don't know the full story. They get them. Spoilers, they get them.